Hi, and welcome back to your Autism Game Plan. I'm Joya Vanderlaan, a family nurse practitioner, a functional medicine specialist, and an autism mom. Today, I want to tell you a little bit about ABA, or Applied Behavior Analysis Therapy. This is one of the most common and well-researched therapies for autism, and it's likely that if you haven't already looked into ABA or been told about ABA, that you will at some point along your autism journey. And so I just want to tell you a little bit today about ABA to give you a little bit more information and arm you with that in order for you to make the best decisions for your child's autism game plan. ABA is a very systematic, data-driven therapy based on different learning theories, and by applying these learning theories into this therapy, it can really help to improve social skills, life skills, behaviors, that kind of thing. Typically, a BCBA, or Board Certified Behavior Analyst, will be the one to do the initial intake and evaluation and come up with what programs they'd like to run with your child. The BCBA typically is not the one to work one-on-one most of the time with your child. That usually is going to be some sort of behavior tech or technician. And typically the ABA therapy runs anywhere from about 10 to 40 hours per week, depending on your child's needs. Since ABA is so data-driven, expect to see data collection sheets. They want to know what interventions they're doing that are working and what interventions they're using that aren't working. And so they use collected data to figure that out. Some of the data is collected by the behavior tech in your home or in the center or at school, and some of the data is going to be collected by you since you're at home with your children. So the pros are, you can see what's working by the data. Okay, even if it doesn't seem like 6 weeks ago they were doing this behavior more and now it's less, we can see the data, they are doing it less. The cons, or the bad part of the data collection, for me at least, and for other parents I've talked with, is that it's one more thing for you to be in charge of, one more thing to monitor, one more thing to remember to write down and keep track of. And that can feel a little bit overwhelming and just kind of puts you on a higher level of alert all the time. Am I doing this right? That kind of thing. One really important piece of ABA for us was the parent training piece, where the BCBA would sit down with us and talk about behaviors and come up with strategies to deal with those. I felt like this was really helpful because despite reading a lot of parenting books, autism parenting books, and typically developing child parenting books, I really felt unprepared and inadequate as a parent of an autistic child. I didn't know what I was doing, and then I often felt inadequate and unprepared, and I let myself kind of spiral into thinking that I wasn't a good parent and I wasn't doing a good job, and that feels terrible. So it was really nice to have an expert there to kind of bounce questions off of and ideas and tell me this is how you should deal with your particular child. So that was really helpful. Practically speaking, what ABA often will look like is rewarding good behaviors and ignoring the bad or undesired behaviors. So for instance, if a child does a good job eating a new food, or doing their toileting routine well, or visiting a new place without having a meltdown, then you would reward them. Maybe that reward is a word of praise. Great job, I'm so proud of you for doing XYZ. Or maybe it's a star, they've earned a star on some sort of reward chart. On the flip side, if they have an undesirable or bad behavior, typically the advice is to ignore that behavior. Now, this is very uncomfortable at first because as parents, we are often used to correcting right away. No, please don't do that. Oh, we don't do this. But instead, with ABA, many times what we're instructed as parents to do is to ignore the bad behavior. Now, of course, if the behavior is dangerous, then you're going to intervene right away. But typically, ignoring the bad behavior and rewarding the good is a lot of what the foundation of ABA therapy is. Before you start ABA, I'd like to give you a couple tips, things that I've learned from, things that other parents have learned from when you're looking for a company with whom to contract to do the ABA. The first thing is I would recommend using a small, kind of privately owned ABA company, one that's maybe owned by the BCBA themselves. This is important for a few different reasons. The smaller companies typically are going to pay their behavior techs more, meaning less turnover. And less turnover for your child is really important. You don't want them cycling through many different therapists or techs. That just doesn't lead to good bonding and good therapy outcomes over time. The other reason is that the BCBA, if they're the owner, they are much more invested in making sure you have a good experience and the therapy is, right for your child, individualized, because this is their business. And so they're very invested in making sure you have a good experience with their ABA. One thing I found really helpful to ask the BCBAs as I was interviewing them, and I interviewed a handful maybe, was, tell me about ABA. How does it work? What are the pros and cons of ABA? They should be honest with you. There are definitely cons of ABA, especially in some people's minds. And, even if it's just the time commitment, you know what? It is a con to have to spend 40 hours per week doing this therapy with your child. So look for honesty and transparency with whoever you hire. Another thing to discuss with the BCBA before starting ABA therapy is how many hours a week are required. Some companies will require you to commit to a certain number of hours per week, usually between 12 and 40 hours per week. But many times they won't work with you if you can't commit to their number of hours. So you want to work with somebody who has your child's best interest in mind, but who also has your family's best interest in mind. It's not always in your family's best interest to commit to 40 hours per week of therapy. I look back on a time not so long ago when Sophie was in a combined 40 plus hours of therapy per week. I felt like I had to get it all done and do all the therapies for her so that we could get her, as good as she could be, right away. I felt like I was in a big hurry. But really what that was doing partially was stressing me out. Not only did I have to take care of her and her 40 hours per week of therapy, I also was taking care of my younger twins. I was working. I was trying to manage a house. I was trying to be a wife and be a friend and be a person. And if I'm honest with myself, I probably overcommitted. And so I want to share that with you so that you can be aware of where you're overcommitted and kind of balance priorities. Yes, it's important to have therapy for our children, but it's also important for us as parents to be emotionally healthy and have some downtime. Another really important question to ask of the ABA provider is, where is this therapy going to take place? Is it going to take place in our home, at a therapy center, at school? Can it take place out in the community, like at grocery stores and the library, for instance? This is important to ask because a lot of times our kids' behaviors are only a problem in certain environments. So maybe your child's behaviors are really only a problem out when you're in the community. Well, then at-home therapy isn't going to be very effective for you. Or maybe your child's behaviors really only are apparent and a problem at home. Well, then a therapy center isn't going to be the best place for your child to have therapy. Now, the location depends a lot on what your insurance will cover, but make sure you hire somebody who has a good knowledge of what the insurance company will and will not allow so that you can get the most out of your therapy and the best kind of therapy for your particular child. There is a little bit of controversy out there about ABA, and this comes particularly from autistic adults who went through ABA as children. Now, I don't think that all ABA is bad. I think that some people probably had a bad experience with it. I do, however, think that there are ways to go about ABA therapy that are not harmful to our children. But what your responsibility is then is to make sure you're working with somebody you trust, to observe them from time to time and make sure that you're comfortable with what they're doing. And then, of course, to speak up if something doesn't feel right or look right to you. ABA therapy is very often covered by insurance companies. Most states have mandated laws requiring insurance companies to pay for ABA services for autistic people. And this is really helpful. It is true, however, that some smaller employer-based insurance programs can opt out of having the ABA therapy coverage, but typically most government plans will pay for it. As you can imagine, 40 hours per week of therapy times $120 an hour, every week times 50 weeks a year, that's really going to add up. So think carefully about ABA. Maybe it is appropriate for your child, maybe it's not. ABA is not the only option. There are other options out there, and if you're not comfortable with ABA, you can still do the right thing for your child and get your child to progress. Thanks again for joining me today. I hope this information has been valuable to you and helped you have confidence that you're doing the right thing for your child. Please feel free to contact us. We are on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube, and we have an email list that we'd love for you to join. We'll send you some free content on sleep, how to get your child to sleep and how to get them to stay asleep through the night. So please connect with us in any of those ways. We'd love to hear from you and just be connected with you and continue to serve you. So remember, be gentle with yourself. You're doing a great job.